Hi, welcome to Tag Arcade. And in this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to do a pause and play button within your game. So I created this demo project, and you see we have about 4 fires on the corners, and I could move my cylinder around, so that's me, the player. And I got like 3 balls sort of bouncing all over the place. So if I hit pause, the 4 corner fires are still playing. But the balls are indeed paused, and I can't move my cylinder around, but it is animating and it is moving around. The reason why the cylinder is moving around is because I want to show you how to do something like an idle animation. So in some games, when you hit the pause button, the character doesn't necessarily have to pause. They could actually do something. So if you played the old Sonic games and you hit the pause button, Sonic will actually start sitting down, start tapping his foot, going, "Come on, I'm ready to get going." And you could do something similar to this. So since I can't really animate a cylinder, I went ahead and just animated it this way. And of course, if you hit resume, all the balls will continue to resume and moving all over the place, and I get to move my character around as well. So this is the project that we are going to recreate. So let's go ahead and stop this, and let's go ahead and create a new Unity project. I'm going to call mine pause play, and let's go ahead and create this project. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is create the base. So for my floors, I tend to use cubes. You could definitely use the terrain as well. It's up to you depending on the scale that you want to do on your terrain and the floor. So I'm gonna call this 10, 10, and yeah, that's fine. We'll say 0.5. Make the cube a little bit thinner. So this is going to be my floor. So let's go ahead and create the walls. So I'm gonna do 10, and the height's gonna be say 2, and I'm gonna duplicate this because this is going to be my left wall and my right wall. I'm going to create another cube, and this is going to be 2, 10, duplicate these, and these are going to be my left and right walls, or top and bottom. Next, I want to get my camera into view, so let's go ahead and move it up, maybe rotate it down a little bit, zoom out, and sort of position it into a spot that you like it. Okay. So what we want to do is we want to color the walls so everything's not white. So let's go ahead and create a new material. And I'm just going to call this a wall material. And we'll make it a nice bluish color. Now we're going to go to our cubes and make this our wall color. So our second wall, third wall, and our fourth wall. Next, we want to create a new material for the floor. So I'm just going to call this floor. And I'm going to make this a nice black. Let's go to our floor and make that black. So we have our cube. Next, we're going to go ahead and create our spheres that are going to be bouncing around. So here's our sphere. And our sphere is really, really big, and why does it look weird? Hit delete and try that again. Create sphere. Okay, that's sort of the sphere I wanted. Let's go ahead and make it a little bit smaller. So I'll just do 0.5 all around and add a script to this. So let's go ahead and create a script. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a script to add a force so that the ball keeps on bouncing around. So I'm going to go into my scripting reference. And I know I need to do something called rigid body dot, we'll say rigid body. So what I want to do is add a force to it so that the ball kind of bounces around. So I'm going to copy this. And in order to do that, we need to first add a rigid body to our object. So we got our rigid body. We're going to call this sphere. And if we ever rename the actual script, we do have to name the script sphere as well. Okay. Now we're just going to take that script that we just copied and we're going to paste it. And I don't want to keep on adding a force all the time. So I'm just going to create it at the start. And let's go ahead and save. So move this out of the way. Apply it to our script, or to our sphere, I should say. And we'll add a force of, say, 200. And let's see what happens when we hit play. Dom? Apparently not much. So the reason for that is we want to create a physics material so that the floor is sort of like ice, so everything just glides all over the place. That way there's no friction and the balls keep on like bouncing all over the place. So let's go ahead and create a new physics material to accomplish that. So in here, we want to make this all 0. And apply this material to the floor. So we got floor, 0. We'll call this ice. And why not? Well, let's see what happens. Okay, so it doesn't really go much anywhere either. So let's go ahead and apply more of a force, so maybe 500 would be useful. And let's go ahead and add this to the walls. And we'll see how that plays. Oops. It looks like I threw my ball a little bit. Oops. Looks like I threw my ball a little too far forward. Let's move it down a little bit more. Okay, so it's sort of still not bouncing around. And the reason being is we have something called bounciness. So let's go ahead and make that 1. But as you saw, I don't really want it to bounce off the floor that way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this. Now let's hit ice. Let's go to edit, duplicate. And we'll call this ice wall. Because I want it to be able to bounce off the wall, but not quite off the floor. So let's go ahead and apply this to our 4 walls. And see how that goes. Okay, so it's sort of bouncing around but losing traction. And let's go ahead and add ice to my sphere as well and see how that plays. No, it's still sort of slowing down. Okay, so let's try ice wall instead. Okay, there we go. So we got our ball bouncing back and forth, just the way we like it. So we're just going to go ahead and duplicate this about 2 more times. Move this over. Maybe rotate it a little bit so it just bounces in a different direction. And do the same thing with the second one. And rotate it maybe this way. So let's see how that plays. Okay. So now we got our 3 balls bouncing around. So the next thing we're going to do is create our sphere, or not sphere, but the cylinder. So we'll create another cylinder. Make sure it's not a parent of anything. So cylinder should be outside. And let's just position the cylinder somewhere. Actually, I'm just gonna hit delete and recreate my cylinder. There we go. Move it back. Move it, make it a little bit taller. And let's go ahead and create a script. So we'll call this player. So with the player script, we want to be able to move it when we use the arrow keys. So we know that that script is called transform.translate. So I'm going to do a search so I don't have to type in the code. So we got this. So I'm going to copy this portion of it into my code here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if input.key, or get key I should say, is my key code dot, let's see, up arrow. We'll say up arrow. We are going to move forward at a certain speed. So what I'm going to do is create speed, create a variable called int, we'll call it float, speed equals 10. And we're actually going to do public float speed so that we can change it in the editor. Once we do that, let's go copy and paste this a few times. And we're going to change this to down arrow, then left arrow, and finally right arrow. And of course we got to move back, left, and right respectively. Okay, let's move the script out of the way, get rid of this window, hit play, and I didn't apply my script to my cylinder, so I'm not able to move it. Let's go ahead and apply the player script to my cylinder, play, and I still can't move my sphere. Why not? Okay, so let's go look at my code. If input get key. Oh, that's why. I forgot to apply my speed to my code. Silly me. So I'm trying to move up, down, left, and right at a 0 speed. And I want it to be my speed of 10. Save. Okay. Hit play. And let's see if I can move now. Yay, I can move now. Woohoo! So if we ever want to change the speed, we go to cylinder, change the speed to, I don't know, 20. And now we can move a lot faster. Okay. Now finally, we are going to add the fire. So Unity actually has fire pre-made, and I'm going to use that. So I am going to go to import my package, it's actually particle systems. I'm going to import all of it because why not? And I'm going to look through my prefabs. If I could open it. Can I open it? Particle systems, prefabs, and I get fire mobile. Okay, get that in there. And we'll say That's a good spot. Oh, and we don't want the fire system to disappear after about like 20 seconds, so I'm going to remove this one script. We want it to stay on the screen forever. So I'm going to duplicate that, move it to the other corner, duplicate this, move it over here, duplicate this, move it up, and I guess I didn't duplicate the first one successfully. So I'm going to move that over there. So we got the 4 fires. Next, we're going to do the pause button. So we're going to create a pause button script. So I'm going to say pause. And finally, last but not least, we're going to create a UI element called a button so that when we press the pause button, the game will pause. So here we go. Go move it to the top right and call this pause. Okay. Yeah. Oh, and let's go ahead and attach the pause script to something. So I am going to say, let's call this pause, and attach my pause script to it. And open this up. So the easiest way to do a pause button is to change the timescale. So we could say void, public void pause button, and we actually have to create a boolean as well. I'll say private bool pause. So if the game is paused, we want to unpause the game. So pause equals false, and time.timescale equals 1. Else, so else means if the game is not paused, we want to pause the game. So pause equals true, time.timescale equals 0. And we first have to tell the game that initially our pause is off. So let's go ahead and try this out. So we're going to hit play. And now we got the fires moving. Everything is moving along. We got to move our character. And if we hit pause, nothing happens because we didn't tell our pause button to do anything. Okay, so that was anticlimactic. Let's go ahead and rig this button up. So take our pause button to here, and we have to make sure that our pause button script gets triggered. Let's go ahead and save the scene. And I'm just going to call this test. Let's try this again. So we're going to move around, hit pause, and everything stops, including the fire animation. So if you're doing like a very simple game and you want to pause something very easily, then you could change the timescale. So time.timescale equals 0 or 1. And if we resume, we could resume. But we don't want the fire animations to stop when you pause. We want it to keep on going. So what I'm going to do is I am going to create a template that allows us to select what we want to pause and what we don't want to pause. So let's go ahead and create a C# script. And we'll call this, I'll say, pause pause, resume. Okay, and let's go ahead and open up the script. So in the script, what we want to do is to be able to find out where our pause button is. So we're going to say private pause, pause, and where is that? We'll say pause equals game object dot find. And what do we call our game object that we're going to find? We called it pause. So let's go ahead and go back and say we got to find our pause game object. Then we got to get our get components, which is our pause script. And let me just go back to our pause script. And yeah, that should be good. And now we could go ahead and create our rest of the script. So we're going to say if pause. Okay, so we can't get to pause because we made the variable private. The reason why we create the variable private is because we don't want anything to pause the game other than that pause button. So in order to be able to access whether or not this pause variable is true or false, we're going to create another function. So we're going to say public bool is game paused. And we're going to return our pause variable. So if our game is paused, it's going to return true, and if it's not, it's going to return false. So since I mentioned earlier that we're not going to use timescale, I'm going to comment this out and get rid of the timescale code. So we're going to say if pause dot is game paused, then we're going to do our pause loop. Else, we're going to do our game loop. Or actually, since it's pretty much we're creating game, we're going to say play loop instead. Now the problem is the script doesn't actually know what pause and play loops are, and we don't want to define it here because this is our template. So we're not going to define what's pause and what's not. So in order to do that, you create something called a virtual function. So we're going to do virtual void, we're going to say protected void pause loop. And the same thing, virtual protected void play loop. Okay. So now our script knows that we're going to have a pause loop and a play loop and what it is. So from experience, whenever you pause or resume something, there are some times when you just want something to execute just one time. So like changing the game state. So in order to do that, we're going to add in a few more code, or a few more functions actually. So we're going to create virtual protected void first pause and virtual protected void first play. So if you're first pausing the game and you need to save some variables, but you don't want it to continuously happen when you pause the game, you're going to do this one, the first pause. And the same thing, if you resume from a pause, you need to resume those states, so we're going to do first play. So that's the purpose of these two functions. So in order to incorporate that, we need to create another variable. So we're going to say private enum state play and pause. And the reason why we're doing a public enum state or a public private enum is so that instead of using like bool or using like 1, 2, 3 to indicate whether or not we're either on a place state or pause state, we use an enum. Okay, so finally we're going to do private state states. And when we first start the game, we want our state to be the play state. So we're going to state.play. Now down here, we're going to say if state equals state.play, we want to make the state equals state.pause. And we are going to call our first pause function. So what this means is if the game is paused and we are changing the state from a play to the pause state, we want to run the first pause just one time only. And then all the other times, we're just going to call this pause loop. And we're going to do that for the play loop as well. So if state equals state.pause, state equals state.play, first play. And finally, when we create scripts, we may need to use the start function. Unfortunately, we don't want to overwrite this start template because then bad things can happen with the script. So we're going to create a new script or a new function called new start. So that if we need to do stuff in our start function, we could do it in this function. So we're going to say virtual void or virtual protected void new start. Save. Okay, so now that we have the template ready, let's go ahead and start coding the rest of the stuff. So let's go ahead and move this out of the way and hit play and see what we need to pause. So I'm going to hit pause, and of course, nothing is happening, and our balls are still bouncing all over the place. So the first order of things is to make these balls stop bouncing around whenever I press pause or play. So let's go ahead and go to our sphere script. We'll say yes. And let's go to our pause resume. So in our sphere script, we wanted to inherit all the functions within the pause resume. But we can't call this start because we don't want to overwrite the start in our pause play. So what we're going to do is we're going to call this virtual protected void start. Well, not quite. We're going to call this override. And what override means is to not use the template that we created, but use this new start function. And yeah, we call it new start, so we have to match it. New start. So next, we want to pause the spheres and resume the spheres. So we're going to go ahead and look at our functions. And we have to do that by the first pause and first play. So we're going to go ahead and copy these. And like I said, instead of virtual, we're going to say override. And the first thing we want to do is to save the state of the velocity. So whenever you're moving objects around and applying a force, you're applying two different forces. One is a regular velocity, whether it's moving up, down, left, and right. And the second force you're applying is a rotational velocity, which is how is it spinning on either the x, y, or z axis. So when we want to go ahead and save our state, we want to save both of those together. So we're going to create two extra variables to do this. So we're going to say private vector3 save velocity. And next we're going to say private vector3 save angular velocity. So now we're going to say save velocity is equal to my rigid body, so it's called RB dot velocity, and then save angular velocity equals RB dot angular velocity. Once we saved those two states, we could actually make our velocity 0. So unfortunately, we can't name the 0 because velocity is actually a vector 3. So fortunately, Unity gives us a nice variable called vector3.0, which does exactly that. It makes everything 0. And we're going to do the same thing for angular velocity. Finally, when we resume it, we want the balls to resume the same speed as what it was before. So we're going to say rb.velocity equals save velocity. Oops. And next, rb.angular velocity equals save angular velocity. Hit save, and let's go ahead and go back to our script, or our game, I should say. So now when you hit pause, our three spheres actually stop moving around, and we hit play, it moves again. There you go. So one down and less. Oh yeah. The only problem is when you hit pause, I can still move my character around, which probably shouldn't be doing when you're pausing the game. So let's go ahead and apply this to our player. So what we're going to do is we're going to do something similar. We're going to inherit our pause resume function, and we don't have anything in our start function, so we don't have to do anything fancy there. And the easy way of doing this is taking our play loop and making that our new update. So I'm going to say override protected void play loop. So let's go ahead and hit play. And now we get to move around. And if you hit pause, I can't move my character. So that was a very simple fix. Lastly, we want to create an idle animation. So when the idle animation, it's going to happen on my pause loop. So I'm going to copy this template and paste it here, so I don't have to retype everything. And I'm just going to say override pause loop. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say this dot transform dot Euler angle is equal to a new vector 3. Well, actually, here's the thing about C# versus JavaScript. What I want to do is I want to just increase my z vector by 5. Unfortunately, you can't really do this in C#. You can't just take a variable and just sort of increase it. You have to create a new vector 3, which is sort of a pain in the butt, but unfortunately that's what you sort of have to do. So instead of doing it this way, you have to do something like new vector3, this dot transform. Now let me get rid of that 5 because that's really messing around with my autocomplete. Dot transform dot Euler angle dot x. This dot transform dot Euler angle dot y. This dot transform dot Euler angle dot z plus 5. And now it doesn't give me an error message. So there we go. Hit save. You don't actually have to use this, but I tend to use this every now and again because I want to explicitly tell myself that it's the current game object that I'm attached to. So while this is optional, it's definitely your coding preference whether or not to use this or not. So let's go ahead and hit play. And now let's move around, hit pause, and I move around. And if I hit resume, I am moving in the wrong axes. Hey, I'm floating in space, up and down. Yeah, this doesn't work out. We need to correct our orientation so that we could play properly. So if we look back into here, we want to say first play. There we go. So we'll copy this, paste it into our player script, and we'll say override. And, oops, one too many R's in override. And we're going to say this dot transform dot dot rotation, if I could spell, equals, well, I want to say 1 or its original orientation. And in order to do its original orientation in Unity, there's something called a quaternion. I'm pretty sure I'm mispronouncing that, but it's that identity. So what this means is to put it back in its original orientation. It's similar to vector 3.0, where you're making everything the default. And we'll hit play. Oops. Sorry. Play. Sorry, not play. Save. We're going to hit save. Play. And now I get to move around. Hit pause. It rotates. And when you play, it resumes. And that's it. So that's how I do my fancy pause plays so that everything can continue to move. So if you like what you see, like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And until next time, have fun and keep on creating games.